Good morning, my beautiful babes and babettes. Happy Friday. I am your resident active advocate, and today I would like to talk to you about access to online resources available now through the AODA to people with disabilities. Yay! This is a very important topic of discussion in our current time period because the web is doing nothing but growing, getting bigger and bigger and bigger. Therefore, more and more access needs to be granted to more and more things. Under the AODA, websites are required to make their tabs, their features, their search function, everything available on the web page, accessible to things like screen reading technology and people with print disabilities who may use a screen reader or something to enlarge the text on the screen. You can do that through just a regular magnifier on your computer, but it doesn't necessarily cover every area you would need it to. So, when I was younger in school, I would often use a program, at least at school, not always at home because I have better accommodation here, just a better setup. I would use a program called ZoomText, which both enlarged the screen and read out any captions over which I put my mouse. Now, because I do have partial vision, I am still capable of seeing where I put my mouse. But when it comes to using ZoomText, that technology I found was rather jumpy. I'd put it in a specific enlarged box spot on the screen. And sometimes if I moved my mouse just a little bit, it would go to the other side of the screen. But that's not what I'm talking about here. I'm not talking about program flaws in the actual accessible technology itself. I am talking specifically about websites making their features accessible to the kind of software that is being used by people with disabilities. Now, my best friend also uses a program called JAWS, which is for the fully blind because it doesn't necessarily display a screen to you. You don't need a screen to use this program. You don't need a mouse to use this program. You press certain buttons on your keyboard, and that's what gets you around on the screen. When it comes to JAWS, reading labels and captioning and things like that, though, websites need to make those buttons accessible to people using a feature like JAWS, or a program like JAWS, rather. Because if you have a button, let's say the go button or the search button on your screen, if you were to navigate to that using the keyboard commands that are good with JAWS, and it just said button, which I have heard it do, you're not going to know what that button is for. So you could hit it and it could take you to a completely different spot on the web page. It could take you off the website entirely. All these things that people with full vision may take for granted that they can see on their screen. If you don't know the function of the button, then you're not going to know what it does. So when it comes to a thing like JAWS reading out the function of a button, a website needs to make that accessible. It has to say search, or it has to, let's say you're clicking a video on YouTube, it has to be able to tell you what that video is. I know that a lot of websites are not yet fully accessible, but that is because the AODA has not yet been fully realized. A lot of companies that put out websites before the year 2012 don't have full accessibility. When we are talking about American websites being brought into Ontario, say Google, okay, they're an American company, they're an American website. It doesn't matter where the website is out of. It has to be made under Ontario law accessible to Ontario citizens with disabilities so that they can read, they can navigate. I mean, Google is one of the most important and widely used websites that there is. So that is very important that we be granted access to those things, because a lot of time, actually, when I was in school, later on in university too, but as I said, at home I don't use ZoomText, but I would, be looking up articles for essays on Google or Google Scholar, of course, not just normal Google, but all of these things have to be made so that people know what they're getting into, because you don't just want to click a random thing and have something happen that you didn't foresee. So this applies not only to software like JAWS and ZoomText, but would also apply to the voiceover technology called Dragon. So people who are unable to use a keyboard, they can dictate via microphone or your system's audio to get what they want out of a web page using a software called Dragon. Dragon I've never actually used myself, but I assume that it would work in much the same way, except the reverse of the sorts of accessible technologies that people with visual impairments might use. So you can see what you're doing, but you won't necessarily be able to click on it. Like, let's say you aren't able to use a mouse or aren't able to use keyboard commands, you would use Dragon instead. So Dragon would also have to be something included in the software. There are, according to AODA law, only two things that don't need to be made accessible, and those are real-time captions. So if you are hearing impaired and, you're watching a video, but the captioning isn't wonderful, that's because it's not covered by the AODA. So real-time captions and what was the other thing? I can't remember what the other thing was. It'll come to me. Okay, so real-time captioning is not covered by the AODA. There are certain features that websites can have to make their captions more accurate, but if you ever turn the captions on a YouTube video, it can be hilarious because there will be odd misspellings, odd mistranslations. And because I can't remember what the other thing is, I wanted to let y'all know that after I am done with this series, I am going to make a sub-series called What Lily Left Out, because there's a lot more that the AODA covers that I haven't fully discussed. I've just sort of been skimming the surface. But aoda.ca, if you would like to read the blogs that I have been using piecemeal for research on this series, can inform you much better than I probably could within the course of 15 minutes. There's a lot of reading involved, obviously, but I think it's worth it, especially since, like, if you are a person with a disability, you know by way of this blog what you are entitled to expect. And when I say the word entitled, I don't mean I want an unfair advantage. I mean, I want to be able to access what everyone else is capable of accessing through their eyes, through their ears, through their limbs, la-di-do, right? We're all entitled to the same rights under the law. And if that means accommodation is needed, then accommodation is needed. And it shouldn't be, this special thing that should only be granted under XYZ circumstances, even though that is often the way it is viewed. So Monday, because I take weekends off, I will be finishing up on this branch of the series with a discussion of customer service guidelines for people with disabilities. These are different from the employment guidelines. It's like, what are you entitled to coming into a store as a customer, right? So I will be discussing that, and then on Tuesday, I will be beginning on my What Lily Left Out sub-series to this series. I have a lot of reading to do, I feel like. but that's okay because it's always better to inform yourself than not. All right. Thank you for your lovely attention and time, and I will see y'all on Monday. By the way, happy American Thanksgiving. I know it's slightly belated, but to my American friends and viewers, hope you had a good time. Hope you had a good meal. Love y'all. Bye. Mwah.